Hi friends, this is Callie. Thanks so much for being here with me today. I'm sharing a watercolor card using the Spring Bouquet stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. This is a large 6x8 stamp set and there are two bouquets. One is smaller and I've done that one before in a mini slimline. So today I'm going to use the other floral bouquet and create a slimline card. I'm going to start off here by stamping my image over some watercolor cardstock, and today I'm going to be embossing it in black. First things first, we're going to go ahead and prepare our cardstock once the stamp is lifted off on that door with a embossing powder tool. Then I'm going to stamp with a crisp black pigment ink. I'm using VersaFine Clair today in Nocturne Black, but you can use VersaFine Onyx Black, which is also a fan favorite. I usually only have to stamp once with this ink to emboss with, but since the watercolor paper is a little bit more textured, I stamped twice, and then I'm going to apply some clear embossing powder and then heat set that. I love heat setting and embossing my images when I watercolor in a hurry because I feel like I don't need to be as precise with it, and that's what I'm trying to share with you today. I just want to watercolor something super fun, super colorful, and not have to think too hard about staying in the lines, so the raised edges on the embossed image really helps with this. Okay, so let's get into the watercoloring. Very simple for me. I just need water, a stamp chamois or paper towel, and my little watercolor pan. I have a brush here that I've dampened with some water, and I have applied some water to my paint pan to loosen up the pigment. And what I'll do is use my brush, even if it has a little bit of pigment on it, and I'm just going to wet the areas that I want to work with. And because they are embossed, I don't have to be as precise, and I can work a little bit faster, and that's why I'm working with more than one petal at the same time. So I've wet the areas that I want to work with, and now I'm just going to pick up some pigment with my damp brush and then drop that pigment into the nooks and crannies of each of those petals that I'm working with. And then once I'm done dropping in the ink, I'm just going to clean off my brush just a tad and remove any excess water. And I'm going to use that damp brush to pull up any excess fluid and even some color as I'm swiping. That way it'll show some contrast and some highlight to each of those petals. If I happen to wipe up too much pigment, I'll just go back in with my brush and kind of pull that pigment back out from the nooks and crannies or the darker areas, or pick up more paint if I need to. So the painting process is going to be the same for all of the flowers and foliage on my card today. And so we'll talk through it as we speed it up so we can get through this card. Watercoloring is always a time-consuming process for me, but once I get into the groove, it feels like it's going a little bit faster. And to reiterate, the embossed image really helps save me a lot of time because I don't have to worry about being a perfectionist. When I do no line coloring, I'm so particular about staying inside each illustrated line and then working with one petal at a time and moving around between petals so that the wet areas don't touch each other. It's a bit more time consuming to do a no line watercoloring. So I always opt for embossing if I'm in a hurry or don't have a lot of time. So my first rose here is nearly done. I'll go ahead and watercolor the second rose as well, and I'm going to skip through that so you don't have to watch me paint the same flower. I'm moving on to this anemone now, and I'm using a different color paint. Again, I'm wetting the petals first with whatever's on my brush. If there's too much pigment, I can always clean the brush, but otherwise I want to flood the entire petal so that I can go ahead and drop in some more pigment to apply darker color to the nooks and crannies, and that will create some nice shading as well as some highlighting on each of our petals. So that was really quick and easy to do on this flower. For the flower centers, I'm going to wet that area and then apply some yellow. I'm just going to drop it in because I feel like dropping it in kind of creates some darks and lights organically, and then I'm just going to let it dry as is. I'm going to use the same color on the daisy to the left and create a yellow dazing using this quinacridone gold. Again, same technique as before. I'm applying some color with a damp brush and then applying some darker pigment into the nooks and crannies and then pulling that color out with my damp brush if I need to, and then swiping up that pigment if there's too much to create that highlight as mentioned before. On the daisy center, I'm also using a dark brown, kind of like before, just dropping in the colors and to give that flower center a bit more contrast and color. Moving on to the foliage, I'm using two different greens, one for the smaller, rounder leaves, and the other sprays at the bottom of the floral bouquets. I'll be using a muted green or olive color. I'm realizing at this point that I've never said what kind of watercolor I'm using. This is Daniel Smith watercolors. You can use anything that you might have. I love the Ulta New artist grade watercolor as well. There is a wide variety of colors in their 24 pan set, and you can also create beautiful cards with those colors as well. And it's a great price point compared to the price of Daniel Smith watercolors. So if you're just starting out and want to try watercolors, Ulta New is a great place to start. And then perhaps you can build your collection with a more professional grade of watercolors like Daniel Smith. When I'm done watercoloring, I'm going to go ahead and use the coordinating die to die cut my image out. I love it when there are coordinating dies. It just makes the process so much easier. I am okay with fussy cutting, but if I don't have to, that excites me as well. Okay, for a background, I'm going to do some ink blending here on a slimline card panel. I have a panel that is 3.5 by 8.5 inches wide and long. And I've got some blush ink here that I'm going to ink blend just to the sides of the cards. And I kind of want them positioned right behind the roses that I watercolored. And then I'll use some bubblegum ink, which is the lightest purple. And I'll do that in the center. And then along the bottom, or I flipped my panel over here, I'm going to ink blend some green for the foliage. This will create a nice and colorful background and almost a glow for our floral spray. I like to trim down my panels after ink blending to get a nice crisp and clean edge. So I'm going to cut off a 1/4 inch off each side, and this will mat a card base later nicely with a white border. I've applied some foam adhesive to the back, and I'm going to go ahead and attach that to the ink blended panel. And we're going to give this card some extra interest by splattering it with some white watered down acrylic paint. I just have some in a jar, and once I shake up my jar, there's plenty of paint left on my lid to pick up, so that's what I was doing. Finally, we're going to stamp and emboss a sentiment. I decided to use this thank you from the bottom of my heart. I felt like the size of it was going to look great on the floral spray that I had already painted and prepared on my panel. I prepared a piece of black cardstock with some anti-static powder tool, and then I stamped my sentiment and then embossed it with the white embossing powder. And right now I'm just buffing off that clay embossing powder residue that was left behind. And I went ahead and cut a straight edge along the bottom of my sentiment because that's nice and straight, and then I fussy cut around the rest of the letters. I like for that black border to be consistent all the way around my sentiment, so I like fussy cutting around the scripted words. And then to adhere it to my card, I used some black foam adhesive strips to adhere behind the sentiment. And all that's left to do is to adhere this to a slimline card base. And that finishes my card today. If you wanted to, you can attach some sequins, but I felt like this card was just great as it is. If you're interested in the supplies that I use, be sure to check out the descriptions below, as everything I use will be linked for your convenience. Also, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. I'm going to link 2 more videos if you're interested in seeing more. Otherwise, I hope you all have a great day. Bye, everyone.